Good evening. It's very impressive. I don't think I ever lectured for so many people before. So today I will tell you the story of Khirbet Qeiyafa excavations, and we'll put them in context so you will understand why they became such an important excavations. Where are we? We are in the Near East. You can see here the Mediterranean, the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea with Turkey in the north, Egypt in the south, and then in the east you have the Levant with Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. And in Israel, which is a quite small country, you know, from one edge to the other edge is only 400 kilometers, which is about 300 miles. So I don't know, probably all Israel can go inside Texas 20 times or so. And then inside Israel, we have a rather small area, which is the territory of the Kingdom of Judah. This is really a very small area. From one side to the other, it's not more than 40 kilometers. And in this area, probably in the time of David, there was no more than 5,000 people. So we are not talking about huge empire. We are not talking about large population. We are talking about a rather tribal community that's starting to become urban. And King David. King David is mentioned in the Bible countless times and is very famous, one of the most famous people in Western civilization. But the question is, what do we know about the historical King David? David is not mentioned, or till recently was not mentioned in any extra biblical source. So all the information about David and about King David came from the biblical text. And we have many questions about the beginning of the Kingdom of Judah and how David became a king and what's happened in this specific time period that David is mentioned in the biblical text. For thousands of years, the biblical tradition has been accepted as representing accurate historical memories. And the founding father of the discipline, like Professor Albright, Professor Benjamin Mazar, or Professor Yigael Yadin, all of them were very important scholars in the 20th century, in the 20th century. They didn't question the biblical tradition. So they basically accepted it as representing accurate historical memories. But this picture has been changed in the early 1980s, so this is about 40 years ago. The first scholars of this movement came from Copenhagen in Denmark, and later in Sheffield in England, and today they spread all over the world. Even in Jerusalem we have scholars from what we can nickname the Minimalist School. And the basic idea of the Minimalist School was that the biblical tradition was written hundreds and hundreds of years after the events that it described, and therefore when it was written, nobody really knew anything, and it's all legend. David never existed, Solomon never existed, there was no temple in Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. And what you can see here is that some scholars believe that 100% of the biblical tradition is historical memories, and then came another school and said 0% is history. And here you are between 0 and 100. What shall we do? And by the way, the Minimalist School went evolution. We can see that there are 3 phases in the development of the Minimalist School, and I will talk about it in this lecture. The first one is the mythological paradigm. Paradigm, it's mean word concept. The concept was that everything mythological, and I explain about it a bit more. The second phase was chronological paradigm, that tried to put everything in chronological frame. And the third phase is ethnic paradigm, people debating about ethnic matters. Now, how it works? So the first minimalist, as I already mentioned, said that it's all mythological. The Bible was written in the Hellenistic era, hundreds of years later, so everything is mythological. David never existed, and so on and so forth. But look what's happened in 1993. You see in the slide an inscription. Okay, this is an Aramaic inscription. In that year, the large part was found, and a year later, 2 more parts were found. As you can see, we're still missing the upper part, and we're also missing the lower part. We just have the middle of a royal inscription. This inscription is not even written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic. And it was probably written by King Hazael or by a scribe of King Hazael, as in he is mentioning that he killed 70 kings. And he killed a king from Israel and a king from the house of David. You know, we have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And if you really think about it, he had to say, I killed a king from Israel and a king from Judah. But instead, he's saying, I killed a king from Israel and a king from the house of David. And from this moment, we have a historical proof that David indeed existed. So only from 1993, we have scientific evidence that David existed. And this, of course, completely destroyed the minimalist theories that David is a mythological figure, because about 120 years after David, he was already known in Damascus as a founded father of the dynasty that ruled Jerusalem. And then about 3 years later came the law chronology paradigm. And this is basically tell-done bypass. The idea of the law chronology is, okay, there was somebody called David, but he was just a Bedouin sheikh living in a tent. There was no fortified cities in his time. There was no kingdom, no administration, and no writing. And then people start debating when urbanism took place in the area of Judah. And if you remember the biblical text, in the time of the judges, for about 200 years, we have agrarian community. People lived in tribal community and in small villages. And once you have a kingdom, you have fortified cities and central authority. So we have here a sociological process, a transition from simple tribal community into state. And the big question is when this transition took place. If it's 1000 BC, at the time of David. But law chronology argues that it happened first in the kingdom of Israel, 150 years after David, and in the kingdom of Judah, only about 300 years later. So the debate became chronological. Now, how do we know that David ruled at about 1000 BC? Nowhere in the world it's written that Jesus was 1000 years after David, or that David was 1000 years before Jesus. So how do we know this? It's going like this. We have biblical chronology and we have Egyptian chronology. According to the biblical chronology, David ruled for 40 years, and then Solomon ruled for 40 years, and then you have Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And in the 5th year of Rehoboam, there was a campaign of an Egyptian pharaoh called Shishak. This is the biblical tradition. So now we go to Egypt, and we're looking for Shishak, and when he made this campaign to ancient Israel. And it's not very easy to know exactly this specific time in the Egyptian chronology, but more or less people talking about 925 BC as the time that this campaign took place. So what do you do now? You do 925 plus 5 plus 40 plus 40. And what do we get? 1010. So why I'm saying 1000? Because 925 is not exactly 925, nobody's sure about it. And also the biblical tradition, when they said that 40 years, you know, the people of Israel were 40 years in the desert, the judges from time to time, they ruled, there was 40 years of quiet, and then 40 in biblical text and biblical tradition is not necessarily 40 years. It's mean a generation. So 40 can be even 42, but 40 can even be 30. So 40 is not 40, and 925 is not 925. And more or less, David ruled at about 1000 BC. Okay. And here came the story of Khirbet Qeiyafa. We started the excavation in 2007, and we excavated for 7 seasons till 2013. As you can see, a beautiful circle of the city and the fortifications, and all this was like this before we started the excavation. It's so obvious, but because it's so clear, people thought probably that it's Byzantine, that it's a Crusader or Islamic, and nobody bothered to excavate the site. The site itself is mentioned already in the year 1850, that's 160 years ago, by a French traveler who made a visit to the Holy Land. So the site was known for 160 years, but we were the first one who thought that it was excavating there. And indeed, after 7 years, we have a city plan, not just a part of a building, but a whole city. You can see the circle shape of the fortification. The area of the site is about 2.3 hectares, 23,000 square meters. It's not very big. And then you can see that we have a belt of fortifications around the city, and I will talk about it a bit later. We also have 2 gates. Near each gate, we have a piazza, an open area, which were used probably as a marketplace. And also, according to the biblical tradition, the king judged the people in the gate of the city. The prophet talked to the people in the gate of the city. And all kinds of economical transactions are taking place at the gate of the city. The gate in Hebrew is called sha'ar. If you go to the bank with dollar, if you go to Israel to a bank with your dollars and you want to change it to shekels, to Israeli shekels, what will be the name for the transaction? Sha'ar. The value of the dollar is called sha'ar, and also in stock market. So you can see that this ancient approach that the gate is the area for economical activities is preserved today in modern Hebrew. So we have 2 gates, and then in the center of the site we have the remains of a large palace, probably the area where the municipality of the city was located and organized the activities in the city and also around the city. This is one of the gates, the western gate of Khirbet Qeiyafa. You can see this is what archaeologists are calling a 4-chamber gate. You see that we have 4 small chambers in the gate. And this is the other gate in the south. It also has 4 chambers, and it's overlooking the valley of Elah. If you remember, the famous battle between David and Goliath took place in the valley of Elah between Socho and Azekah. Our site is between Socho and Azekah. Socho, which you can see here in the photo, it's hard to see exactly, but I'll try. Oh, sorry. There is a small hill here, a bit more yellowish, and this is the site of Socho. The Arabic name still preserves the name Socho. This is about 2 kilometers to the east, and 2 kilometers to the west, we have the site of Azekah. So we are really between Socho and Azekah, and the battle of David and Goliath was between Socho and Azekah. This is the casement city wall. There are 2 ways to build fortifications or to build city walls in antiquity. One way is to have a solid wall. The wall can be 2 meters or 5 meters or 20 meters, but it's all built from bricks or from stones. A casement city wall, as you can see here, is composed of from outer wall, inner wall, and in between we have open space. And this space can be used for dwelling or for storage or whatever was needed. And this type of construction, of course, is faster because you need less material. All the middle is not built, so you need less building material, so it's cheaper and also faster. And you also have, once you encircle an area with a fortification, every square meter inside the fortified area is more valuable. So once you leave the city wall empty, you get much more room to be used. So people like this type of fortification in the Iron Age, in the time of the kingdom of Israel and Judah. Here you can see our best preserved casemate standing for more than 2 meters in height. The city was suddenly destroyed. Okay, it was built and then destroyed after 20, 30 years. And because it was suddenly destroyed, everything was frozen inside the city. So it's like a biblical Pompeii. You know, the Pompeii in Italy that was suddenly destroyed by the volcano, and everything was, archaeologists working there find all the activities and every all-day life object. So Khirbet Qeiyafa is quite similar. We have hundreds of thousands of pottery shards, 10,000 of animal bones. We have 100 metal objects. We discovered Cultic artifacts, 2 inscriptions, Egyptian scarab, seals, and many other objects. So the site is extremely rich with artifacts. But think about it from the people who live there. From archaeological point of view, it's a gold mine. But for the people who lived there, it was a horrible catastrophe. And then we sent olive pit for hydrocarbon dating. Carbon dating is a system that's checking the isotope. Regular carbon atoms has 12, not atom, but how you call electrons, and I don't know the word in English, in Hebrew. Anyhow, The regular one has 12, and unstable carbon isotope has 14. And every 5,700 years, half of it decay. So it's like a clock, and it's possible to measure the number of carbon 14 and the number of carbon 12 in the sample, and then you can deduce the date. And the accuracy is about 1%. So if you have something which was 3,000 years ago, the date will be plus minus 30. And if you have a sample which is 4,000 years ago, it will be 4 plus minus 40. Okay? So what you see here is the first 10 samples that we have, and later we sent more. Now we have about 30 samples. And as you can see, all these samples are concentrated at around 1000 BC. Now you remember that the big debate was when urbanism started in Judah. In the 10th century, it's like the biblical tradition, or the 9th century, or the 8th century, or as a minimalist approaches or low chronology claims that urbanism started in Judah only toward the end of the 8th century. That will be 300 years later. And once we have the result that we have a fortified city in Judah from 1000 BC, from the time of King David, we have a full page in the New York Times, a National Geographic magazine, and PBC make a whole program about it, and then New York Times and all the newspapers in the world kept on writing about Khirbet Qeiyafa season after season. And people ask me, who make a PR for you? I said, King David. So this was really a revolution, because before this, even in Jerusalem, the capital, there was no any evidence for occupation from the 10th century BC. And so in other sites in Israel. So this was really a complete revolution. The first site from the time of King David. And what do you think happened? So all the minimalists said, did we make a mistake? Of course not. 10 days after we published the first article about Khirbet Qeiyafa, we didn't even say if it's David or not David. We just said a fortified city on the border between Judah and Philistia, because this is the location, in the valley of Elah, radiocarbon dating 1000 BC. There was already an article in an internet journal, and this article claimed that Khirbet Qeiyafa is a Philistine site. So King David can still be a Bedouin sheikh in Jerusalem, and this fortified site has nothing to do with King David. The same scholar, after 4 years, wrote another article and said Khirbet Qeiyafa is a Canaanite site. And a few years later, he said, Khirbet Qeiyafa is such a complicated place, we should stop writing articles about it. But what's happened is that after Khirbet Qeiyafa was discovered and published, there is now a big debate about who lived in Khirbet Qeiyafa. And the various possibilities that has been raised are that it's Philistine, that it's Canaanite, that it was built by King Saul and belonged to the kingdom of Israel, or that it's a Judean city belonged to King David. And there's also an idea that it's a local population in the Shfela. So they're not Judean, not Philistine, not Canaanite, and not anything, something local. So now the big question is, who lived in Khirbet Qeiyafa? Okay? So all this part of my lecture was the introduction. And now we had to deal with the real problem, or the real question. Is Khirbet Qeiyafa a Judean city? This is the question today. This is the debate today. No chronology and not mythology, but the ethnic identification of the population of Khirbet Qeiyafa. And how do we deal with this question? So the methodology is comparative analysis. I will present here 6 major aspects relating to the city, and I will compare it with Philistine site, with Canaanite site, with site in the kingdom of Israel, and site in the kingdom of Judah. And we'll see if Khirbet Qeiyafa is more Philistine in character, or more Judean, or whatever. And the 6th aspect, it's too far away, I can't read it. But it's urban planning. I will talk about the urban planning. Then I will talk about the cooking habit. Then the 3rd aspect will be administration. The 4th one is writing. The 5th one is the geopolitical location. And the 6th one is the cult. Okay? Each one of these 6 aspects will be examined. I will do it very briefly, of course, because otherwise we need to stay here till tomorrow morning. And I will not do it to you. So we have here again the plan of Khirbet Qeiyafa. And you can see that we have the casemate city wall. You already know what are casemate city walls. They are city walls which are open and they have rooms inside the city wall. But you can see that there are houses abutting the city wall. And people who lived in a building can also use the casemate nearby. You can see it here in this aerial photograph which concentrate on the fortifications. You see people who lived in room 1 have an opening and they can use the city wall casemate. People who lived in room 2 can use this casemate. And people who lived in room 3 can use this casemate, and so on and so forth. There's about 100 casemate around the city wall. So, but this is not only something technical, it's only, you have a concept here. The city wall is public, okay? It's built by the kingdom or by the city. But the houses are private. And if the casemate, the public casemate connected with the private houses, so what are the casemate, public or private? And indeed, it's something that's typical only to Judah, where they mix the same together. By the way, you can see that the casemate city wall is built with huge stones, which is 200 kilo up to few tons. And look at the private houses, they are built with much smaller stones, which is only 30 to 40 kilos. Because when you build a fortification, you can take people and they quarry stones and bring them to build the city wall, which must be very massive. You don't want that every enemy that comes will kick it and the city wall will collapse. So the city wall is built with very massive stones. But the people, the private people, don't have the same means and the same funds as the public. So they collected small stones and built the houses from smaller stones. So this photograph also shows you the difference between public and private. And now the question, where else do we have this type of urban planning, where you have casemate city wall and houses abutting each other? And today there are 5 sites like this in ancient Israel. The most northern one is Tel Natzba near Jerusalem. And then we have Bet Shemesh, then we have the site of Khirbet Qeiyafa, then we have a site called Tel Bet Mirsim, further to the south, and the most southern site is Beersheba. Okay, so there are 5 sites. All these 5 sites are located in Judah. They are not in the kingdom of Israel, they are not in Philistia, and they are not Canaanite sites. So the urban planning that we see in Khirbet Qeiyafa is a typical Judean urban planning. And this is, I think, the most important point, because the city is built by a community, not by private people. So what we see here is a typical Judean urban planning. The second aspect is food habits. First of all, the animal bones. We excavated in the site, I don't know the number exactly, but 30 or 40,000 animal bones. Not 1 or 2, enormous amount of animal bones. And the animals that are represented in this assemblage are sheep, goat, and cattle. We don't have even 1 pig bone in the Iron Age city of Khirbet Qeiyafa. If you go to Philistine sites, like Ashdod and Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gat, up to 20% of the animal bones are pigs. Okay? So you can see that the site cannot be Philistine. And if you go to Canaanite site, in Canaanite Lachish, for example, there's about 4% of the animal bones are pigs. So the Canaanite didn't consume pork on a large scale, but still they consume some pork. So you can see the trip, and you know, till today in Judaism, you have a taboo on consuming pork. So this is probably very early taboo in Judaism. So Khirbet Qeiyafa it cannot be Philistine according to the animal bones, and not likely to be Canaanite. The other habit is this pottery vessel, which is called baking tray. You put it on fire, and you see the upper part has these holes. You put dew on it, and you can cook pancake or some pita bread. And the idea is that this hole keep air, so the bread or what you're cooking will not stuck to the baking tray. In every house that we excavated in Khirbet Qeiyafa, we discovered few of these baking trays. They are not common at all in Philistine sites. So again, you can see that the people of Khirbet Qeiyafa has different way for preparing their food than the Philistines. Administration. At the site, we discovered 693 jar handles, which has a finger impression on them. And they're coming from jars. Here you can see a group of jars. Most of the jars has 2 handles, but some jars has 4 handles. Sometimes one handle has the impression, sometimes the 2 handles has impressions, sometimes we have 2 impressions on the same handle. So we have here some coding that maybe we don't understand it exactly. But now, what is it? In the Kingdom of Judah, it was very common to stamp handle of jars. What you can see here, number 1, is what we call Lamelech jar, and this is typical. Lamelech jars appear already in the 9th century BC, and then in the 8th century BC. Later, in the 7th century BC, this is a common impression, which we call rosette impression. It's like the flower. You see the impression on it. Later, in the early Persian period, we have lion impression. You see here a lion. Later in the Persian period, we have this impression, and on it it's written Yahud. This was the name of the province of Judah. And later in the Hellenistic period, I really have a very unclear picture, unfortunately. You have a star, and on it it's written Jerusalem. And our claim is that this type of habit to stamp jar handles starting at Khirbet Qeiyafa with the finger impression, which is the simplest, and later it became more elaborate by using stamps, real seals, and to stamp the seals. This is a typical Judean concept. You don't find it in Philistine culture, you don't find it at all in the Canaanite, and you don't find it in the Kingdom of Israel. So it's not Judean, it's only Judean. It's not Canaanite, not Philistine, and not Israelite. But what is the meaning of these things? Now we need to think about taxation in the ancient world. How do you pay tax today? You get salary probably, and then the government takes 20% or 30% without even asking you. At least it's in Israel like this. But in antiquity, nobody got salaries. There was no coins yet. Coins were invented only a few hundred years later. So how people pay tax in antiquity? In 2 ways. One is to donate time. People had to donate every year a few weeks to build fortifications, to organize road, to harvest the king land, or to participate in military activity. So people had to donate time. And the other way to pay tax was to give part of the agricultural products. And people, if somebody grew lentil, he had to give lentils. If somebody grew barley, he had to give barley. If somebody grew olives, he will give olives or olive. Okay, olive oil. You cannot take people what they don't have. You can only take what they have. So the kingdom collected these agricultural products. Now, how do you collect them? How do you keep them? And then what do you do later with this product? You give them as salaries to officials and to priests and to people that are associated with the kingdom administration. Because again, people who work in the kingdom didn't get salaries as money. They get agricultural products. So once you have a kingdom, there is an enormous amount of agricultural products that had to be collected, stored, and then redistributed. And how you control the system? How do you know that there's no corruption? If you mark the jars, you have better control on the system. If you go to somebody's home and he has a jar with a finger impression, the person has to explain what the jar is doing at his home. And also, if you want to collect the empty jars and to recycle them and use them again, it's easy to collect them because they are marked. So Kingdom of Judah has this concept of producing these jars and marking them so the administration will be more smoothly organized. And this is something typical Judean. And it's already started at the site of Khirbet Qeiyafa. Now we are, the fourth aspect are the inscriptions. In 2008, just in our second season, we discovered this, it's a pottery sherd, and on it with ink, there are 5 rows and 70 letters. I can talk about it forever, just about this inscription, but I will not do it tonight because, again, we don't have too much time. But we found one inscription, okay? And what's happened next? we found a second inscription. This inscription is incised on the pottery before firing. So every letter is very clear and it's very easy to read it. And it's written here that this jar or the product of the jars came probably from the estate of a guy called Ishbaal, son of Beda. Beda is a unique name. It was never found before in any inscription. It also is not known in the biblical text. But Ishbaal is well known. From the time of David, there are 5 people who are called Ishbaal. So this is from the early 10th. It fits well to the names that were common in the 10th century BC. And it was very famous when we published the article about the inscription. It was also in the news, and we were even invited to Prime Minister's office. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. You want to see the jar. You want to see the Ishbaal inscription. But what happens that between the discovery of the 2 inscriptions, another inscription was found at Bet Shemesh, published from Bet Shemesh, and then a year later another inscription was found in Jerusalem. Today, before we started excavation, even one inscription was not known from the early 10th century in this region, and after our excavation, 4 inscriptions are known. And where are Jerusalem, Bet Shemesh, and Qeiyafa? All of them in the territory of Judah. They are not found in Philistia, they are not found in the kingdom of Israel, they are not found in Canaanite sites. So again, you can see that Khirbet Qeiyafa with its inscription fit the patterns that is known in Judah and not in any other political or ethnic unit. In the geopolitical location, I already mentioned that Khirbet Qeiyafa is located in the valley of Elah. It's located on the border between Philistia and Judah, and it's located in the valley of Elah. And the valley of Elah is also the main routes leading from Ashkelon and Ashdod, the cities on the Mediterranean, port cities, into Judah. So this is the main route leading into Jerusalem from the coastal plain. So if you have a kingdom, what do you need to do? You need to fortify the border. And you need to check the main route, who is coming in and who is going out. And Khirbet Qeiyafa is exactly located at the edge of the kingdom on the border and on the main road. And it's not surprising that the biblical text that describe the fight between Philistine, between David and Goliath, is attributed exactly to the same location, between Socho and Azekah. The whole distance between Socho and Azekah is maybe 2 miles, 3 miles. Okay? And Khirbet Qeiyafa is exactly in the same location. And this raises a big question, of course, what are the connections between the story and the city? But again, if Khirbet Qeiyafa was Canaanite site, Canaanite would not build anything in this location. And Philistine, again, it has no value for Philistine, and it has no value for the kingdom of Israel, which is further to the north. Only if you are a Judean, it's worth building a city in the location of Khirbet Qeiyafa. And the last aspect that I will mention here, but really very, very briefly, is the cult. Again, the cult of Khirbet Qeiyafa, I can talk about it for 3 days because it's so interesting, but I want to emphasize one thing. But first of all, you can see here some of the cultic objects which were found at the site. Altogether, we excavated at Khirbet Qeiyafa about 10 houses, and altogether about 60 rooms. In 3 of the rooms, we discovered evidence for cultic activities. Not in temples, but inside houses. In 3 houses, one of the house can have 6 rooms, or 10 rooms, or 16 rooms, and 1 room is dedicated to cultic activity. So you cannot say that we don't know things about the cult. We have a lot of evidence about the cultic activities in the site. But what is amazing is that we don't have anything of this. Now, what is this? What are these? These is figurines made from clay, and they usually presented naked women. These are very common in the ancient Near East, already in the Neolithic era, 10,000 years before now. Okay? And they have it in the Neolithic era, and Chalcolithic, and early bronze, middle bronze, late bronze. Also in the Iron Age are very common in Philistine site, in Canaanite site, and even in the kingdom of Israel. If you go to Chatzor and Megiddo and Tanakh and Tel Rehov, you will find these type of figurines. Now, why these figurines are so common for thousands and thousands of years? By the way, also in Judah, they became common, but not in the 10th and 9th century BC. They are found by the 100 and even nearly 2,000 of them were found in Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of the temple, which is the end of the 7th century. But in the first 200 years of the kingdom of Judah, they are not found. What are they really? They're probably icon. Think about the fertility process. If a woman is pregnant, she can have miscarriage or something, so it's quite serious matter. Then the delivery is very dangerous. Even today, some women, maybe every 1 million or so, but even today, some women die during the delivery process. And then they also need milk to feed the baby. So all this is a three critical aspect of the fertility process. And in order to succeed, probably women used to keep an icon like this at home, which is supposed to help them during the process. But in Khirbet Qeiyafa, we don't have even one of them. And as I said before, we excavated 60 rooms. We excavated about 1/4 of the city. So you cannot say you didn't find them because you didn't excavate enough. We excavate a lot, we have 3 cultic areas, we have a lot of cultic paraphernalia, and even one of them was not found. And if you go at Arad and Beersheba and other sites in Jerusalem, in Judah from the 10th and 9th century BC, they are not fortified cities, they're only villages, you will not find them. So it's again, it's typical Judean aspect. Then a special discovery is this object made from stone. It's a box. It's about 35 centimeters. And it's a box to keep sacred artifact inside them. And if you analyze the architecture feature here, and I did it today for an hour in a lecture, it fits the biblical description of Solomon palace and also some aspect in Solomon temple. So again, it's connecting the site to Jerusalem. Things like this were not found in any Canaanite site, not in Philistine site, and they are also unknown in the kingdom of Israel. So this is found in Qeiyafa, which is a Judean site, and also the temple and palace in Jerusalem are Judean. And we were also able to suggest a new reconstruction of Solomon Palace based on this stone model. The stone model helps us to decipher technical terms in the biblical text which lost their meaning over time. So this is a very important discovery, the stone object. And when people are asking me what is the most important discovery at Khirbet Qeiyafa, I have no problem to answer. The most important discovery are the olive pits, because they gave us the date of 1000 BC. And all our scientific strengths coming from the date. But if you ask me what is the second most important artifact or object in Khirbet Qeiyafa, so I'm not sure. I don't know if the inscriptions are more important or if this building model is more important. Because this really enables us to do unbelievable things and open the gate to understand things that nobody even dreamed about thinking about them. So now I am closing this part of the lecture, but saying that Khirbet Qeiyafa is not Canaanite, is not Philistine, and is not Israelite, but it's a Judean site based on the urban planning, based on the food habit, based on the administration with the finger impression, based on the inscriptions, based on the geopolitical location, and also the absence of fertility figurines. And people who said that Khirbet Qeiyafa is Canaanite, they didn't really give any arguments. They just wrote it and that's it. But they didn't say it's Canaanite because of ABC. And the same, the people who said it's Philistine or that say that it's Israelite or whatever, they didn't give arguments. They just want to go against our interpretation. So they raised other possibilities, but these other possibilities was not backed with any real discussion. And another thing that if you check it, all these people who suggested it's Canaanite, Philistine, and so on, there are people who 20, 30 years ago said that the biblical tradition is all mythological. So of course they don't like the new information. And all these, the things that I told you and many more were summarized in this book, In the Footsteps of King David, which was published just 2 months ago. And the big debate that I mentioned, we summarize everything. This is a scientific book that was published, or no, no, this is the same. Okay, this is the same one, but we also published a scientific book which called Debating Khirbet Qeiyafa, and we related to all the criticism and all the other suggestions that has been raised over the year about the interpretation. Oh, here it is, yeah. So you can see here this book, which called Debating Khirbet Qeiyafa, and we are arguing about all the things that I mentioned here are presented in this book and many more aspects as well. But now, okay, now let's say that I convince you that Khirbet Qeiyafa is a Judean city, okay? So what you should ask me? So this is everything we know about King David, one city. Is it enough? What do you think? It's not so good. So what are the conclusions? We should find a second site from the time of King David. And indeed, a few years ago, a second site was found that has from the time of King David. This is a site which is called Khirbet er-Rai. The site is located near Lachish. Qeiyafa located a day walk from Jerusalem, and Khirbet er-Rai located a day walk from Qeiyafa, so it's 2 days walk from Jerusalem. And when the site was surveyed, and on the topsoil of the site, pottery was found, and the pottery that was found on the surface of this site is like the pottery that we excavated at the city of Khirbet Qeiyafa. You see now that the archaeologist has two major methods of working. One of them is a survey, and the other one is excavation. A survey is going just over. Usually you have a team, 4 or 5 people, they're walking 10 meters from each other, and they can cover every day another 1 or 2 kilometers, and during a month or 2 months or 3 months, they can cover a very large area. And the idea is that to walk, and once you see stones, working stone, or you notice a remain of some building, or if you see pottery on the surface, or glass, or part of mosaic floor, or whatever is noticed, while you are working, while you are make this survey, you stop and you're documenting, and in this way we can locate archaeological sites. And altogether we have in Israel about 30,000 archaeological sites that were discovered during surveys. Maybe only 1,000 of them has been excavated till today. So still 29,000 sites which were not excavated. So you can see that there is still enormous amount of information that waiting to be discovered. So Khirbet Qeiyafa and also Khirbet er-Rai were noticed during archaeological surveys, and we were the first one to excavate in Khirbet Qeiyafa, and indeed we found pottery from the time of King David. Now the same type of pottery that was known at Qeiyafa and dated by radiocarbon dating was found on the surface of this site. So what are the conclusions? In this site there's also a level from the time of King David. So what did we do? We organize an excavation, and we start working at the site. I can tell, you can see here one of the seasons. We have squares, and we are excavating with volunteers, and all of you, by the way, are most welcome to join us as volunteers to the next season. The next season at er-Rai is the last week of January and 2 weeks in February. And then later in summer, we will work in June, in July, and in August. Or no, not August, in July. 3 weeks in winter and 3 weeks in summer. This site is not as big and nice and rich as Khirbet Qeiyafa, and it has a much more complicated history. We know that we have a lot of Philistines present in the site. We have Philistines from the 12th century BC, and then we have enormous monumental building of the Philistines from the 11th century BC, and then on top of it, we have some remains from the time of King David. So this site is not a city from the time of David, but it's a village. Okay? So today we have a village and a city from the time of King David. And I believe that in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, another city will be found, and then another village will be found. I don't believe in anything exceptional in archaeology. It's just a stage in research. You find the first thing, so it's very exciting. And then you have the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, and you can understand the whole period much better. So this is our contribution so far. Now nobody says that nothing is known from the time of David. We have a city and we have a village in Judah from his period. You can see some of the excavation area. Altogether, we tested 4 parts of the site: area A, area B, area C, and area D. And the remains from the time of David, the architectural remains, were found in area B. Now look at the geopolitical location of Khirbet er-Rai. It's on the border between Judah and Philistia, and it's overlooking the valley of Lachish. And it's opposite Ashkelon. Khirbet Qeiyafa was on the valley of Elah, on the border between Judah and Philistia, in the valley of Elah, opposite Gat. This is a nice 4 rooms that we have from the time of King David. It's not as impressive as a big city, but these rooms were suddenly destroyed, and they are extremely rich with artifacts. You can see also the architecture is monumental with big stone, very massive architecture. And they were suddenly destroyed like Khirbet Qeiyafa, and a lot of pottery is found on the floors. What you see here is the restoration of half room, and it's about 40 vessels. And then later we excavated the other half of the room, and when the restoration will be finished, we'll have from one room about 70 or 80 complete vessels, just to show you how rich it is. And hopefully one day we'll find also an inscription. Everybody wants us to find inscriptions, as if it's so easy. So if I want to summarize what we know, before our excavation, nothing was known about, from archaeological point of view, about King David. And now, after our excavation, at least some aspect. I'm not saying that I'm happy with these results. It's not enough, maybe, but it's better than nothing. Okay? So what we really have here is we have urbanization, because the site of Khirbet Qeiyafa is heavily fortified with very massive fortifications. The pre-planned cities, I didn't talk about the urban planning, but the ways that the casmat and the houses are abutting each other. You cannot build a building here and a building here, and suddenly the city wall will encircle everything and abutting. So this was planned before the city wall. Before they put the first stone, they already knew how the city going to look like. And where are we located? One side is in the border opposite Gat, the other side is on the border opposite Ashkelon. So we really see that these sites are located on the borders. We have administration with the finger impression. We have writing, and writing is extremely important, not just because writing is needed for administration, but remember what was the main argument of the minimalist movement, that the Bible was written hundreds of years after the period of David and Solomon, and because there was no reading and writing, historical knowledge could not be preserved and transferred from generation to generation. But once we have now 4 inscriptions, it shows you that people knew to read and write, and the whole process of documenting things and recording historical events and moving and preserve them for generation to generation was indeed possible. And also cult. We don't have this mother goddess figurine at the site of Khirbet Qeiyafa and also at Khirbet er-Rai. But Khirbet er-Rai, we excavated only these 4 rooms and 2 other rooms, so we have 6 rooms. You can say that the sample is too small. But nevertheless, we don't have them. And what is really amazing is that I already mentioned Qeiyafa is opposite Gat and Khirbet er-Rai is opposite Ashkelon. And if you think about David lament over Saul, you know the Philistine has 5 capital cities: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Gat. And David mentioning only 2 of them, Gat and Ashkelon. Why Ashdod, Gaza, and Ekron are not mentioned? Because they're far away. They don't have any border with Judah. And you can see how the 2 sites that we excavated, the geography of our excavations and the geography of the lament fit very well with each other. Thank you.
We are going to have a little conversation here. Thank you so much, Professor Garfinkel. Fascinating stuff. What a great thrill to get to learn about the work that you've been doing. You've been busy.
Sure.
We really appreciate your presence here with us. We're thankful for have the chance to learn about this important work. I want you all to remember that you get to participate in this part of the program, so hopefully you got a note card when you came in, and either you've already written a question on it or you're hurriedly writing one now, and pass it to the aisles, and we're going to have some friends come along and pick those up from you, and I'm going to ask some of those questions as time permits, but I'm going to get us started here with a couple of questions. And I'm wondering about these are more in the general personal nature. I thought we might start with why you ended up moving into archaeology. As a college student, you studied it. Why did you choose archaeology as your career and life's pursuit?
Well, already in high school, I had deep interest in archaeology, and I volunteered to excavation in two sites, one near Haifa and the other one near the Sea of Galilee. So after I completed the military service, I came to the university, and it was quite natural that I will go to study archaeology.
Well, it's so clear that it's a passion, and it's something that brings you great joy, and is something that you love. I love we have a lot of college students here today, and I love for them to see the way you came to your career and the joy and the passion that you have for today. My question for you is, how does one sign up for one of those, and do you accept college presidents with no skills to participate in the digs?
Everybody is welcome. My oldest volunteer was 80 years old. He came when he was 75, year after year after year. When he was 80 years old, he said, I'm too old. So he didn't come anymore. But I don't think he was too old. He could keep on coming. He has no problems at all.
Excellent.
And the way we are working, as you saw in one of the slides, we're working in square, 5 by 5 meters. In every square, we have one archaeologist, MA student, or even PhD sometimes. And in the square, we have 2 or 3 volunteers. And the archaeologist is doing all the recording, and he also tells the student what to do and what not to do. And the same group stay in the same square till they finish the season, or till they finish the excavation. So they know exactly what's going on in the square. And he all the time explaining to them why they are doing what they are doing. And if something is not clear, they can ask him. So in this way, the volunteer is not just removing earth, but all the time they understand what we are doing.
I'm comforted. I think I can make this work. So there's a high probability that I would not mess up the enterprise if I came and joined you.
Sure. But you know, you look so good, we'll give you to push the wheelbarrows.
You heard it here first. In your book, In the Footsteps of King David, you mentioned the unrealistic expectations that people sometimes have for archaeology and for archaeologists. I think you specifically say people expect you to be able to find the sword of Goliath, sure. And that's not a fair expectation. I wonder if you might just reflect for us, for this audience, what are realistic expectations? How can we look to archaeology to help us better understand the biblical account and the history of that period?
Well, let's put it this way. Can I go to Washington, D.C., excavate and find Abraham Lincoln? So in the same way, we cannot excavate and find David, we cannot excavate and find Solomon, and we cannot excavate and find Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. But what we can do is to look for sociological processes. We know that we have a period of the judges, which was agrarian community, and then we have urban society. And this is, according to the biblical tradition, took place in the time of David. What we can research and what we can date is when urbanism started. And if urbanism started at 1000 BC, it's supporting the biblical text that describe the period of David. But we don't have David himself. In the same way, the Bible describes that there was royal architecture in Jerusalem in the 10th century BC. Unfortunately, in Jerusalem, we have the Temple Mount and the mosques, and it's not possible to excavate the Temple Mount. But what we have from Khirbet Qeiyafa is a shrine model, which is carved in the same style of royal architecture that described in the Bible in the 10th century BC. So you have an object from the 10th century BC in Judah, at Khirbet Qeiyafa, that show you how royal architecture looked like, and then you have the biblical text which describe royal architecture from the same region, from the same period, and you have the same characteristics. And then there is a biblical tradition that Rehoboam fortified Lachish. I went to Lachish, we excavated at Lachish for 5 seasons. We found a new city wall which was not known, level 5, we have radiocarbon dating, and it's the end of the 10th century BC. So it's not Rehoboam himself, but if the Bible said that Rehoboam fortified Lachish, and in Lachish you have fortification exactly from the time of Rehoboam, so it's accident?
No.
And the same with Khirbet Qeiyafa from the time of David and the temple. I mean, we're adding enormous amount of data that shows that everything that's described in the biblical text is also represented in the archaeological data.
Yes.
This is the realistic thing. But you cannot find Rehoboam, you cannot find David, you cannot find Solomon.
Right. Yeah. In your book, you write that in 2007, it was possible to claim that nothing was known archaeologically about King David. 10 years later, the situation is very different. And I wonder, it's what you've been talking about tonight, but those 10 years, what changed? What happened?
Everything. Sometimes I compare, have you seen a magician? You go to a magician, so he have this cylindrical hat, and he put all kind of things inside, and suddenly you have a rabbit. I'm doing the same, you know. I have a cylinder, I put Kazmat city walls, I put radiocarbon date, I put animal bones, and I have King David. Don't you think that I'm a magician?
You used a term today. I wonder if we might, for this audience, and I think you're using it as a term of art when you describe the religious activities that you found on the site. You use the term cult or cult activities or cult practices. Talk to us about how you're using that term to describe what you're seeing there.
Cultic is a very complicated aspect, but when you have 60 rooms, in each of the rooms you can find regular pottery, which can be cooking pot or baking tray or jars with finger impression. And if you have stone objects, there will be a basalt for grinding and food preparation. And then in 3 rooms you have different finds. We have the shrine models, and we discovered libation vessels, and we discovered basalt altars, and other things that totally different from the regular activities. And even today, if you have a regular house and you have a church, you have different activities, you have different architecture, and you have different objects. And the question is, what kind of cult was practiced in Khirbet Qeiyafa? This is a very complicated matter, but we know, for example, that these fertility figurines were not used.
Yes.
But here we're going into 2 horrible questions. And this is, the Bible claims that the Israelite cult should be aniconic. You are not supposed to do you're not supposed to have any graven image. And then also you have one God. In the ancient Near East, they believed in many gods. And also later in Greek and Rome, they have a whole pantheon. And according to the biblical tradition, the people of Israel are supposed to believe in one God.
Yes.
But then what the prophet saying all the time? You are not obeying the rules. You are not obeying the rules. And even King Yoshiao was such a righteous king. Why? He took the Asherah. Asherah is the Canaanite goddess. And he was such a righteous God, he took the statue, he took Asherah out of the temple and burned it. So what do you learn from this? That in certain times in the temple in Jerusalem, there was a representation of a goddess.
Yes.
So all this monotheism is very complicated. And also the question, what's happening in Khirbet Qeiyafa with the shrine model and other objects. So it's very complicated.
In your book, for this audience, we would appreciate the biblical account. This audience is going to understand the biblical account that there was a united kingdom. There was King Saul, there was King David, there was King Solomon, then there's a divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. You talk about in your book about the fact that archaeology at this point doesn't establish. I wonder if you just might help with this audience understand why you have talked tonight about the kingdom of Judah as the discovery instead of talking about the united kingdom.
Do you think that I can talk about United Kingdom from one city and one village? I don't think that I have enough. What I'm trying to do is to say what we can be sure about. Maybe there was Abraham. I'm not saying that no. Maybe there was Exodus. Maybe there was Joshua. Maybe there was a United Kingdom. But the Minimalists said nothing existed. I'm trying to base David, Solomon, and Rehoboam as king of Judah. And then the question is if they also ruled the north. So we need to go to the north and do excavation and find data in the north.
Yes.
I don't think that from one side I can claim that I know everything.
Yes. This just goes back to the fact that
And
you're
also
relying upon the evidence that you found to this point.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think that in order to do good science, you need to know what you have and what you don't have.
Yes.
And my mission is to establish that there was a kingdom in Judah from 1000 BC. This is even under horrible debate. Not everybody in school, here everybody agree with me, sure. But if you go to scientific conferences and you go to Tel Aviv and you go to Copenhagen and London and other places, most of, or a large part of scholars don't agree. So even this is under very heavy debate.
Yes, absolutely.
So if I will start talking about the United Kingdom, I said, well, Garfinkel, you can't trust anything he is saying. So I should know what I know and fight for this. Once I create a base, then you can make one step further and then another step further. But we need at least to have something solid.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're making progress, and as you say, the future is bright as these discoveries come along. Hopefully, there will be more in the future. We have a few questions from the audience, so
sure.
These are actual audience questions. Why would Lachish be more important than Hebron as the second most important city to Jerusalem for King David?
You know that Hebron, if you take the biblical tradition, Hebron mentioned a lot of time in the time of David, and then it disappeared. And the cities that mentioned most of the time in the 9th and 8th and 7th century BC in Judah, in the biblical text about Judah, is the city of Lachish. And then we also have the account of Sennacherib, king of Ashur, that came and destroyed Lachish, and in his palace in Nineveh, he made a beautiful relief describing how he conquered Lachish. This is now in the British Museum.
Mm.
And then we have from the end of the First Temple period, the Lachish letters. The excavation at Lachish uncovered about 18 letters, like the Qeiyafa Ostrakon. They were written with ink on pottery sherd, and they are dealing with various aspects, including that the head of the army went to Egypt. Mm. So not just, buying and selling. You have really political connections. So Lachish was extremely important. So.
Yes. So there's a question here about the archaeological process. Why do you excavate only for 3 weeks in the summer and 3 weeks in the winter? Why is that the schedule?
You should know that the main problem in archaeology is not the excavation, but the analysis of the data. I'm working 6 weeks, all the volunteers go home, and I stay with 10,000 animal bones, 100,000 pottery sherd, thousands of metal objects and stone objects, and who is going to analyze all this? So we have students and scholars that are taking part in the analysis. But for one season of excavation, 3 weeks or 6 weeks, then we have 1 or 2, 3 years that are needed for the analysis. So this is the heavy burden. Time that's needed for the analysis. And another aspect is also budget. Our budget is limited, and we cannot excavate forever.
So here's a question about with the 30,000 sites you mentioned that there are in Israel, is there a way to use technology to assist and to broaden the reach of the excavation process?
I hope that in the future people will develop penetrating radars. They're already using it today, but it's not always giving successful results. But maybe in the future you just go to a site and in a few weeks you make some penetrating radar, survey, and you get a plan of houses and city walls, gate, and things like this. It's quite possible that future technologies will make miracles.
Yes.
But there is another problem. Even if you have a survey, how do you know what is the dating? Let's say that the survey shows you houses. After 1 meter, you have houses. After 2 meters, you have more houses. After 3 meters, you have other houses. But I don't know what is Roman, what is Byzantine, what is Canaanite, what is Israelite. After all, you need to excavate in order to get material for dating. And this will not be achieved by these technologies.
Yes. So another question, how are the archaeological sites protected during the times when they're idle? Or are they?
They are not. People can go and loot everything. There's a lot of antiquity robbery that took place in Israel and Lebanon and over the Near East. People say that the traffic with antiquities is second after weapons.
We've seen
So
a little
enormous
bit.
damage caused to archaeological, thousands of archaeological sites are damaged every year.
There are a couple of questions about the storage jars and questions about the fact that they did not have flat bottoms, or it appeared that they have pointed bottoms. So can you explain that?
They probably, when they store them, they didn't have concrete floors like here. So in the floors, they make small holes, and the jars were placed in these places. The point is, when you have a flat jar and you remove it from place to place, if it's how do you take it? On the back of a donkey. If you have a flat base, if it gets heat, it will break. If it's pointed, it can move nicely as the donkey walks, and it will survive the transportation.
And a few questions which shows our experience in this country with the Indiana Jones movies.
Great.
So we're moving now into popular culture, and I expected this question to come, but some questions about the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. What are the odds that this is, again, back to the reasonable expectations of archaeology, right?
Well, the ark was made from wood, and wood cannot survive. You know what's happened to wood after a few hundred years? It's decayed, or if it's not, or burnt. And probably when the temple was destroyed and set in fire, so the ark was probably burnt and decomposed.
Yes.
I think it's the most logical conclusion.
Another way that Hollywood has disappointed us. Well, Professor Garfinkel, what a thrill and a joy to get to be with you tonight. Thank you for coming to Lubbock Christian University, and thank you for your presentation. Won't you join me in thanking Dr. Garfinkel?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining.